First of all, it's great to be here. Thank you all for coming. When I told Kitty Boone that I was interested in participating in the Ideas Festival this year, I asked her to please give me something topical. So I was very happy to see that she obliged, so thank you, Kitty. I think every so often an article is published that strikes a nerve and I think provides a touchstone for all of us to consider the choices we've made and where we are in our lives. And I think that this article certainly fills that bill. More than 1 million people have come to Atlantic.com to read Anne-Marie Slaughter's piece entitled Why Women Still Can't Have It All. It is on track, this is pretty cool, Anne-Marie, to be the most read piece on the site. There have been 2,000 comments, 170,000 Facebook likes. I'm one of those people who's very happy there's no official dislike on Facebook, by the way. Hundreds of tweets and a whole slew of articles debating the merits of the piece. Is it an anti-feminist treatise that will set women back, or a common sense approach to changing the culture of the workplace to make it easier for all of us to have that often elusive work-life balance? Anne-Marie Slaughter was the State Department's Director of Policy Planning for 2 years, as many of you know who read the article, until she decided to return to her tenured teaching position at Princeton. She's the classic underachiever, really. Feeling, quote, I could no longer be both the parent and the professional I wanted to be. So I'm really excited to have a conversation and, of course, to open it up to questions from you all, because I know there are probably a lot of questions out there. So, Anne-Marie, welcome.
Thank you.
I haven't done this for a while, so I might be a little bit rusty. A number of critics, including Rebecca Traister of Slate, who's also an author, have taken issue with the title of this piece and the notion of having it all. They sort of think it's a hackneyed phrase that should be retired permanently from the lexicon of feminist rhetoric. And I guess the question is, do you have any regrets about this title? And does anybody really have it all? Isn't it a misnomer that I think it's fair to say does set women in particular, up for failure?
I think if I had an absolutely accurate title, it would be Why Working Mothers Need Better Choices to Be Able to Make It to the Top. So,
don't blame it on the editor, Anne-Marie.
No, I'm not. That I think is what I'm trying to say. Interestingly, I had a focus group of women of my age and younger women, very talented women, who read this piece, and several of them wrote back and said, what you're saying is you can't have it all yet. And the reason I used have it all, and I understand a lot of the negative resonance, is that in my generation, I graduated from college in 1980, and the women ahead of me were really blazing trails. When I was in law school and my male professors would say the judge, the doctor, the lawyer, she, I'd jump every time because I didn't know a female judge or doctor. I knew one female lawyer. So having it all just meant having a career and having a family. And that's why it became the mantra that it became. I think it's clear to me that many people hear it differently now. They think it means having everything you want. None of us have everything we want. Men, women, and frankly, everybody in this room have far more of what we want than 99% of the people in this country. So I think we should change it. But the question then is, so what replaces it? I did this on Twitter. I said to Rebecca Traister, okay, give me the hashtag that is not having it all. And she came back with, having a balance. Terry Givens came back with having a life. And I think that's where I'd like to take it going forward. Having a life where you can be a parent, you can be a professional. That way it applies to men and women. But the last thing I'll say, I'm not sure if I'd said why working mothers need better choices to make it to the top. I'm not sure 1 million people would have read it. And I wanted to start a conversation, and we've started a conversation.
What has most surprised you about the response to this piece?
The scale is just off the charts. I mean, it's ironic, because I've spent a lot of time in social media in the last year, and I'd built a Twitter following before any of this happened, and I write about how social media is transforming global politics. Nothing prepared me for the idea that you could put something up online on a Wednesday night, and by Friday you had 450,000 people who'd read it, all these Facebook circles of people talking about it. That has surprised me globally. I mean, we're hearing from people in Vietnam and Nigeria and Japan and Brazil, all over the place. And the tremendous response from men as well as women, which I've had a lot of as well. So those three things.
You told me, we had breakfast, and you told me over coffee.
This was worth it, frankly, just because I got to have breakfast with Katie Couric.
You told me that the responses have been overwhelmingly positive.
They have. Now, obviously, there's selection bias, right? There are plenty of people who are writing me and saying they didn't like it, but 95% of the hundreds and hundreds of messages I've gotten and the letters to The Atlantic start with thank you. And they often say, I cried when I read your article. And these are from really high-achieving women and women in all different professions. And then they tell their story. The one thing that I think has happened is that because I was willing to tell my story, people feel freer to tell theirs. And the power of these stories of women desperately trying to hold it all together and trying to be the professional they want to be and the parent they want to be are very, very powerful. And I really feel that we're on the cusp of being able to make change, and most of what I have heard has been thank you, and now let's go forward.
And we're going to talk about some of those changes and the response you've gotten from some of the people who are in the position to make those changes in a minute. But you can see that you're, quote, well aware that the majority of American women face problems far greater than any discussed in this article. What do you make of the criticism that these are high-class problems you're dealing with that only affect a certain segment, as you acknowledge in the piece, of the population, highly educated, affluent women, not certainly the ones struggling every day to hold down 2 jobs, single mothers who are trying to make ends meet? Should this really, in your view, be the focus of the national debate when so many women have it so much worse?
Well, as you say, I absolutely knew that. Obviously, given all the privilege that I have and the kind of job I have, I knew I was, as I said, I'm writing for my demographic. But here's how I think about it. There are many problems in this country, and there are many problems that I think we have to work on, and the availability of good daycare, of good schools, of good health care, all of the things that would make it better for all Americans, men and women, are hugely important problems. But I focused on one problem, and it's the same problem Sheryl Sandberg focused on. We have all these women coming, we have 50% of women entering the workforce, more than 50% of women coming out of top schools, and yet as you go up, we have 20% in boardrooms and at CEOs and in government, in legislatures. Indeed, one of the few places you have women and men in equal leadership positions is academia, and that's because we can manage our own time. So if you say the problem is not enough women at the top, then you've got to write for the women who could make it to the top, who are, by and large, except for some unbelievably extraordinary people who pull themselves up, the women in this room, our daughters, my students. So if that's the problem that I wanted to address, then I had to address that audience.
And the notion that women who could achieve a certain level leadership positions could then implement the policies that would trickle down and help the women that I just described who are struggling every day. Let's talk about this whole thing with Sheryl Sandberg, because it's been set up, sort of described in the media. What a shock, as a cat fight. I'm very familiar with that. A lot of times Brian Williams and Matt Lauer, I'm telling you, it's ugly, but it never gets written about. I'm kidding. But so what do you think about this whole notion that this is, and what is your biggest beef with Sheryl's kind of encouraging women to not lean back, or whatever her phraseology is? And if you did have an opportunity to have a cup of coffee with her, which I understand it may be in the works, because she reached out to you on email and said, we need to talk more about this and soon. How do you think sort of what she's telling women to do, and how do you think what you're saying could possibly dovetail?
So first place, you're absolutely right. Sheryl Sandberg and I think, are both role models. We're both people who want women to go as far as they can possibly go. We start from the proposition there are not enough women at the top, and to the extent that she is inspiring a lot of young women, and particularly in the tech industry where we don't have nearly enough, that's fabulous. And to the extent women at Barnard heard her and said, I can do it and I'm going to try, that's great. So we start from the same place. Where we differ, I think, somewhat, and I think both things are necessary, but I see lots and lots and lots of young women who have plenty of ambition. What they don't have is accommodation. Accommodation for letting them have more flexible space. And this goes for a lot of working fathers as well, that would allow them to both have their careers and have people. So what I want to say is, yes, there may be an ambition gap. I know there's some research that shows it. What I see is much more an accommodation gap. And we probably need to work on both, right? I think this is a conversation where the more powerful, successful women who can participate in it and inspire others, but also inspire change, the better. And I hope she'll rejoin the conversation.
But you say Cheryl's advice, I guess your biggest complaint is Cheryl's advice is, quote, contains more than a note of reproach that successful women are saying to the women in the generation behind us, what's the matter with you? In other words, I think you, through the article, you talk about women aren't doing well enough because they're not committed enough, and you take umbrage with that whole sort of observation.
Yes, I do, and I don't think she intended a note of reproach. Let's be clear. I don't think she meant to shake her finger and say, you know, you're not ambitious enough. But what she was saying is, you know, lean in, don't leave before you leave. I agree with that, but I'd say ask for what you need. You know, ask for the accommodation you need. I do think many of the younger women who decide, look, I need to take a different track because I simply can't, you know, make partner and have kids before 35 when people tell me I should have kids, you know, are feeling like they're letting down the side, and they feel bad about that. And what I want to say to them is, it isn't just about you. It's about the society. It's about the economy. It's about our values. We can change those things. You should feel great about sort of what you're doing and how you're doing it. Because I don't think we're going to get where we need to go if we make women feel bad. And I don't think she wants to make women feel bad, but I think that message, I've been told by a number of women, that message made them think, well, if I just tried a little harder, I should be able to do it. Women are trying, they are doing absolutely extraordinary things, and we need to help.
Are you worried, though, Anne-Marie, that the unintended consequences of this piece will sort of make an increasing number of women opt out? Because, you know, one of the things that you talk about in your piece is that we need to close the leadership gap by electing a woman president, 50 women senators, ensure that women are equally represented in the ranks of corporate executives and judicial leaders. And you say only when women wield power in sufficient numbers will we create a society that basically works for all women. But how do you do that if, in fact, it's too hard? I mean, don't we need to have some sacrificial lambs who are out there making sacrifices in their personal lives so they can achieve and work the hours they need? I mean, you've got to work pretty hard to become president of the United States. You can't say, oh, you know what? I can't go to that UN session because I've got to go to my daughter's recital, right?
Right. Although, no question, and in my business, you know, you can't sort of say to the Egyptian government, would you please hold? I got a crisis at home. That's not going to work. Although I will say, you know, I have seen President Obama get up at 9 o'clock at a White House dinner and go upstairs and make clear that he was going up. But no, look, there are a bunch of jobs where you aren't going to be able to balance it. And you have to know that if you're taking one of those jobs, as I did for 2 years, you're going to see a whole lot less of your kids. But here's the thing. I mean, obviously, if I thought that what I was writing would make women opt out, I would never have written it. And I wrestled for a long time. As I said at the outset, you know, my peer said to me, you can't write anything about your own struggles, about making different choices. You will discourage younger women. And then I went and talked to a group of Rhodes Scholars who are as accomplished as young women and men as could be, and I told them the truth, and the first response was, thank God, you didn't give us just another you can have it all talk. And that's when I decided the women who've made those sacrifices above all were the women ahead of me who really, right, they worked in a completely man's world, and the things that they had to do to get there to open the doors for my generation
And deal with.
Were amazing. I think my generation has made a lot of progress. Many of us had kids late and experienced infertility issues and lots of issues where we now tell a lot of younger women, try to have kids before 35 if you can. That leaves this generation who feel very empowered, right? They're raised, as somebody said, they're raised as soccer players, and told that they could do anything they want to do as little girls. And then they're getting there and saying, I'm just not sure how this is all going to fit. I want to be a top career professional. I want to have a family. How am I going to make this work? And what I'm trying to say is I think the women's movement, I think, frankly, our society has gotten to a place where we can say, let's ask for what we need. I think along the way we might end up with a more balanced life for all of us, and that would be a good thing. But we can ask for what we need and make it easier for, as I said, women to stay in the pool. And that's my ultimate goal. I want women to still be in the pool, so when you look for the managing partner and you look for the high State Department officials, all the women in the Obama administration, as I wrote, when we stepped down, men replaced us, because every available woman who did foreign policy who was a Democrat was recruited. Everybody. It's just not very big a pool. When men step down, there are more men who love to have those jobs. We need more women in the pool, and to do that, we've got to allow women to have families, not stay home, have families, and also pursue their career ambitions.
Your husband, Andy, is here, I know. Andy, where are you? Hi, Andy. Andy is a prince. I would like to rent you out if you're available, because seriously.
Hey, wait a minute.
I'm kidding. This is turning into a whole different discussion. But an amazing father, obviously, to your two sons. And you say in the piece, Anne-Marie, you write that a partner who shares the parenting load isn't enough because it assumes that most women will feel as comfortable as men do about being away from their children as long as their partner is home with them. Do you really think the maternal versus the paternal instinct is so strong that choosing family over career is in fact reflexive? Because I know you said you were entering treacherous territory when you wrote this, and to be honest with you, you kind of lost me here.
Okay. So first of all, I'm glad Andy was talking to you. I'm glad you called out Andy. Actually, Ezekiel Emanuel said last night, he's the first dude. I think we like that. And he has been a hero through this, and he's a fabulous father. And honestly, both of our sons, even though as teenage sons they butt heads a lot, would say, honestly, that I think because of the way I work, they have a wonderful relationship with their father as well as their mother. That's essential. Right? Having a mate who will be an equal partner, I think, is absolutely essential for women who want to be full career women, just as having women who've been able to play that role has always been essential for men. So that is very, very important. This was really hard. I always worked, our kids went to daycare early. I never felt the need to be home with them, particularly when they were young. I mean, I was always able to be there when I wanted to be, and we had lots of flexible time. But I did not feel this maternal instinct that I had to be home with them, particularly when they were young. And I think women really vary, and that's fine. I mean, different women make different choices that way, and that is perfectly fine. What I was trying to say, and this is hard, but when our son really did need, frankly, both parents, all hands on deck, even with both parents, very hard, and I take my hat off to all single parents. I do not, that is very, very hard. When I felt that he was making life choices that were very bad life choices, and they were going to affect the rest of his life, I felt, he didn't ask to be born. I brought him into the world. We brought him into the world. It is my responsibility to him. And even if I'm in a job that is affecting possibly millions of people around the world, as I wrote, there are lots of people who could be in that job. There was only one person who could be a mother. And based on what I have seen of men and women, there are many men whose kids need them. When the mom is home, I think they feel it's a little easier to say, mom's at home and I can still do what I do. They have to do what they do. They're making an income. For many women, I think that tug is, as I said, it didn't even feel like a choice. It was, in the end, this is something that I have to do. And I don't, there's so many stereotypes here. Mostly what I would just say is, if you feel that, act on it and feel good about it. So many women are made to feel bad about those choices. And when I got home and told people that I'd come home because my 2-year leave was up, but also because of our teenagers, they were fine as long as I said, well, I would have lost my tenure. That was fine. They said, that's fine, we understand that. The minute I said, but actually, the most fundamental reason that I'm home is because we have teenage sons and they really, needed us both at home, then I get this slight kind of, oh, I don't really want to hear that. You're choosing your family. That's not the sort of working woman's creed. That's not so acceptable. And that's crazy. We should be in a society where we say, that is great. You are living up to your responsibilities. You're investing in the next generation. That is a wonderful choice to be emulated, to be praised, to be valued, every bit as much as the choice to be the first woman director of policy planning. And that, in the end, is really the key.
I think what you went on to say, women often choose their families over their careers, where men choose their careers over their family.
That's too stark. That is really too stark. And again, many, many men, including my own father, which I didn't know until I wrote this article. My father wrote me and said, when I was a partner in a Virginia law firm, I had the choice to move to Richmond to be a more senior partner, and I decided not to because I wanted to be more home with you. And my brother, that's certainly true. So there are countless men who have made choices to be more home with their families, and I would like to applaud all of them as well. I do think, yes. But again, we're talking about a pretty rare, small slice of highly ambitious people, alpha women, alpha men. I sort of hate that term, but we're talking about people who really are driven in their careers. And that's where, at that level, at the top, because we're talking about we want women to make it to the top. What I think I see, and the numbers bear it out, these incredibly ambitious, educated, talented women are choosing at some point to say, I really want to be whatever my professional career goal is, but I also want to be a mom. And when those conflict, I'm not gonna opt out or drop out. I would like to abandon those words. They suggest failure. No, come on. I haven't opted out or dropped out. I've just taken a different path so I can be a parent and a career woman. And I see more women making that choice than men, again, at a pretty high level.
We should take this opportunity to point out, because Anne-Marie has gotten some questions about this, that your son Edward felt totally comfortable with this piece because some people raised that to you, right?
Yes. So I have to say, the first thing is Edward, even when there were all these difficulties, at one point I said, I'm going to come home. And he looked at me and he said, Mom, you can't come home. You're a role model. And I was like, you could make this a little easier on all of us. You really could. So he, of course, I would never have published any of this if he were not okay with it. Of course, I showed it to him. I asked him. We debated it. He was perfectly cool with it, and I would never have done it otherwise. And frankly, right now, every girl he knows is Facebooking this, sending it to him, calling him rebellious teenager in quotes.
He's using this
He's
as a
having
chick
a
magnet.
great time. He is
excellent.
There is no problem.
You know, you outline, Anne-Marie, some of the things that you could have done to extend your time in Washington, because as I read this piece, I kept thinking, why didn't she do this? Why didn't she do that? Why didn't Mary Matalin figure out a way to combine raising her girls and still working in the Bush White House? You write that you could have gotten your family to join you in Washington, which would have been difficult for the boys, I'm sure. Getting classified technology installed in your home, as a male coworker did.
Jim Steinberg.
Commuting 4 days a week instead of 5. And I kept wondering, you know, here you were, you know, a pretty big deal at the State Department. Why didn't you use your position to leverage circumstances that would work better for you? Because it seems to me if you want to change overall public policy, why not start with your own cell phone, with your own personal situation and kind of work outwardly from there?
So it's an important.
I don't want to stress you out.
No. You can tell these things, you know, they're hard. They're hard choices, and we did think about that. The first thing I have to say is when I originally got the job, we sort of wrestled and we sat around and talked about it, and the kids were like, "Oh, Mom, we don't want you to leave, and you know, this is going to be hard." And so I said, "Well, you know, we could all go to Washington." And then it was, "Bye, Mom." There was like no question. They did not want to move to Washington, and we had moved them to Shanghai for 9 months just a year before. So, you know, they sort of said, "We've done that, thank you." But also, this was going to be hard on them. We knew, of course, it was going to be hard on the family. There was no question, and we decided having them in great schools where they had a wonderful community, they had their friends, they really were getting a lot of the things we wanted for them, even if I weren't there, would be far better than moving them. I still would rarely have seen them because I would have still been in one of these jobs where I was leaving at 7 and coming home at 10 or 11, and yet they would have been completely disoriented. It would have meant Andy had to commute from Washington back to Princeton. So that means then putting that on him, that he wouldn't have been there, whereas he was able to be there. So that really wouldn't work. And we thought about it. You know, I don't know, maybe there was a job where it would have been so important to do, but this one, particularly given that I'd done it for 2 years, we said no. I could have asked Secretary Clinton to let me work from home 1 day a week, but this goes back to, look, there are some jobs that we were serving the country. You know, she needed a full-time, hands-on person. And she might have said yes, but I don't think I would have been serving her or, frankly, the country in the way that we needed. And I decided instead, no, I'm going to do this for 2 years, and then I'm going to step down. And, you know, as you say, I have to give a shout out to Jim Steinberg, who's here, who's on the program, who did get technology installed, who once ran a meeting from a pediatrician's office where he was on the phone in the pediatrician's office. I was back in the State Department. I was totally supportive of what he was doing, but I could hear the doctor. I could hear his daughter. You know, he's trying desperately to do this. You know, he made it work as much as he could, and then he too stepped down after a couple years.
But I mean, isn't this the problem, Anne-Marie, that these jobs, that you said Secretary Clinton needed somebody full-time, that these leadership jobs, these positions of power, require an almost myopic intensity and commitment that really don't lend themselves to more flexibility in the workplace.
So plan for that. So this is my point. It's to say not you can't do it. It's that it may take you longer to do it than you thought. I mean, if you had asked me when I was 30 or 35, and you'd said to me, you're going to get the job of your dreams, and then you're going to have a chance to be promoted and stay on, I'd have said, there is nothing that would stop me from making that choice. From where I sit now, I say to younger women, yes, you know, you can do it, and I want you to do it, but be aware that it's going to take a huge toll, and you may well do it for 2 years, not 4, 6, or 8, which is what many people do in political positions. Plan for it. Think about when you're going to be able to put yourself up for that. Think about, you know, at what point you're content having, you know, working and having an army of care helping raise your children. It takes a village. And then think about the fact that when they're teenagers, often It's not the amount of time, it's when they want to talk to you and what those conversations are, and you kind of have to be available because, as you said, you can't stop a country from erupting because you have a problem at home. So it's much more about plan for it, expect it, understand that these trade-offs are there, and then, and this is for all of us, when you're ready to go back in, and this is critical. What most women say to me is, I can't go back in because there's this blank spot on my resume of 3 or 4 years where I worked from home or I didn't work, and then I'm not eligible. And I want to say, those 3 or 4 years, let's call those living up to your responsibilities. Let's call those being a national security mom and investing in the next generation, right? We keep talking about how without education, our kids will not be able to compete in the 21st century economy. There are any number of ways that we can value that and then say, not that you should automatically waltz back into the job. No way. You should compete. And somebody who's stayed on the job the whole time is going to get higher faster. But you should still be able to compete.
But don't you talk about the fact that it's very hard when you're in your 40s to enter all these arenas of power? Is that referring to people who kind of devoted their lives to raising kids and then want to put off having a career?
Yes, and I think for the women ahead of me who had kids and then often, became judges and all these wonderful things, they had their kids in their 20s and their kids were largely out of the house by their 40s, but there weren't options in their 20s, right? They weren't competing with the 30-something version of themselves, their younger self. Now, unless you're in the game early, you can't lay the foundation, but if you lay the foundation, and if you keep your hand in various ways, which you can do, then you should be able to come back in.
Let's talk about solutions, because I thought there were great ideas. I saw a little of myself in some of the things that you described in terms of a certain career path. But before we do, and we also, the change in attitudes, because I think you deal with that a lot in the piece. I thought that I was really heartened that you brought up this ACLU Foundation in Massachusetts, because I think they have the right idea, or this organization has the right idea in providing family-friendly policies, giving people time off to deal with aging parents. Yes. Because I do think when things are seen as too working women friendly, it does create a lot of resentment and a backlash, as I think someone in the piece said. Can you describe sort of those kinds of policies and if they can be applied to other workplaces, even demanding ones like the government?
Yes, so absolutely. The first thing is this needs to be parent leave. Parent leave rather than maternity or even paternity leave. Where it's for a child being born, it should be parent leave. More generally, it should be family leave to allow you to care for a partner, to allow you to care for parents. And many people have written me about, having both parents who need care while children are still at home. So I think that absolutely, this should be seen as all of us have responsibilities to loved ones, even if we're not married, even if we don't have children, and our society should accommodate that. Even more broadly, this is also about work-life balance in a world where clearly, given the responses to my article, many, many people and many, many men are feeling like that we've just gone way too far. We're working 24 hours on 24 hours. We don't have the ability to be human beings in the round, work, life, volunteering, whether sports, whatever it is. So I think there are a lot of policies we can adopt that will first of all apply to men and women, but then apply more broadly. And one thing I'd say, because I've heard from a lot of single people, and I think this is really important, when you have to leave and pick up your kid, you may come back to work later, you may work from home, but you really need to be very mindful of the people in your workplace who don't have children, who are staying there, who often are picking up the slack. That contribution needs to be recognized. They are making it possible for working parents every bit as much as broader policies, and they often feel undervalued, as I've heard from many.
But shouldn't they also be accommodated slightly in this quest for a proper work-life balance in terms of, I have single friends and they say, we have interests, we have things we want to do, and people should be aware of that. Our employer needs to know that just because we're single doesn't mean we want to work 24/7 either. They want to have a more complete life. Absolutely. And not just because they have kids.
Well, I've heard from a number of CEOs already who have written me, some who've come up to me here, who've said, thank you for your article, and we are reviewing schedules, when we have meetings, what sorts of things we can do. And some CEOs of pretty big places. I would say the first thing is to have a conversation, right? To sit down and have a conversation in terms of both what working parents need, and people need to ask for what they need, but equally the single people without kids. I think a lot of, again, why this article has had such impact is that it's striking a nerve with a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. And the first thing you do is you have a conversation, you hear people, you figure out, where the problems are, and then you think about what change can be made. A lot of change can be made, not for every job, not for every workplace, but for a lot. And I think that actually, what I'm seeing is that I think we're actually on the cusp, not of taking away hard choices, but making them easier.
Do you think it's realistic, though, in a bad economy where we're falling behind in terms of global competition and there's this anxiety in the country to suddenly be magnanimous and accommodating to all employees? I mean, is that a little kumbaya? I mean, I'm all for it, don't get me wrong, but I just don't know how realistic it is, given kind of our workaholic culture, which I want to talk about FaceTime in a minute.
Yeah. Well, in the first place, I know, we're always bashing Europe, and this has nothing to do with the euro for the moment, but in terms of actual productivity, the French are just as productive as we are. Now, I don't want us to be France. Let's make it clear. There are a lot of things about the way their workplace is structured that I don't like, although there's a lot of things that they do for working parents that I do like. But there is no evidence that giving people time makes them less productive. There's a lot of evidence on the contrary. And that's not exactly surprising, right? I mean, and when I manage, I tell people family comes first. And what I get are far less stressed out employees that always get their work done, and employees that will walk through fire to work for me because they know I'm going to accommodate what they need. So I think we should try it before we decide that it's a problem. The other thing I would say is there's a huge amount in other economies around part-time work. The British have a law that means you cannot discriminate against people who have part-time work rather than full-time work. That actually opens up lots more jobs. There are an awful lot of people who both can use part-time work and would take part-time work. And that's, again, something where you may end up creating jobs as well as in ways that I don't think we know. I'm not an economist, but I've heard from lots of economists. I heard from a Goldman banker last week who gave me all sorts of statistics on how actually this would be good for the economy. I'm going to leave that to the economists, but all I can say is there's an awful lot of evidence and a lot of things we could try before we decide that this is going to be bad for the economy.
I want to make sure I leave time for folks to ask questions, but just a couple of points that you raised. You talk about changing the culture of FaceTime. And it's funny, I thought that with technology and the ability to do jobs from remote locations, as you mentioned, that FaceTime would be less important in the workplace. But you say it has such a hold on employees still. And it was a while ago, but you told the funny story about Dick Darman putting his coat on the back of the chair and leaving the light on, so people thought he was still there. That
culture is alive and well in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. But do you think it's changed in other places because of the advent and the use of technology?
I do. I mean, I do only because of the number of people I know who use Starbucks as their office whenever they're traveling. When I'm in New York for a day and I've got meetings, between meetings, I just adjourn to the nearest Starbucks and set up my laptop, and away we go. And lots of people, I mention in the article this woman diplomat from Britain who says, when men started working from home more than working more flexibly, that started changing things. So I think that culture is changing in lots of places, maybe less Washington. But I do think it is important to have some FaceTime. And most people will tell you that, right? That for one thing, an endless email chain can be far less efficient than actually talking face to face. It's remarkable. And also because people bumping into each other in workplaces is a good thing. You know, it sparks ideas, conversations. So I don't think we can get away from some FaceTime, but I would say, for instance, you can decide, and some workplaces have, you know, you gotta be here from 10 to 3. That's when we're going to be, you know, you got to be in the office. You got to be working longer than that, but you got to be in the office at that period. The rest of the time, you can work from remote locations. There's more flexibility. So some balance between enough face time to feel that there is a workplace. And again, some professions this won't work, but an awful lot, particularly in the knowledge professions, which is again where elite professions are moving in lots of ways, I think there's a lot of room.
And you also talk about revaluing family values in terms of, I think you've kind of touched on this, making the notion of taking care of kids as important as taking care of aging parents. Or my brother-in-law's an architect, and he said one of his colleagues left every day at 5 because his wife had cancer. And so he was dealing with that, and people accommodated that. But if it's dealing with children sort of in a daily way, I think you bring up the observant Jewish,
Jack Lew, yes, the head of the Office of Management and Budget.
who people respected.
Absolutely.
Sort of what he wanted to do in terms of leaving Friday afternoon and not working until sundown Saturday, and leaving in time to get back to New York,
Absolutely.
right, by sundown on Friday. But to make sort of a family and a more sort of those kinds of responsibilities as acceptable as other sort of considerations in people's lives. How do you do that?
I think you start by talking about it exactly in terms of responsibility. I mean, it's really interesting that for him, it's a matter of faith, and it's his obligation to his faith. And I've worked with many others, and absolutely, I think we all respect that. I would say when you have children, you know, nobody says Jack Lew shouldn't work, right? Thank goodness he is working, but he has his work, and he has his obligations to his faith. If you are a parent, you have obligations to your family, right? It is a responsibility. That is a deep part of what parenting is. And I think we talk about it that way, we think about it that way, we honor it that way. You know, people say, well, but you choose to work. Well, yes, but again, I would say he chooses to work. Many people choose to work and still have responsibilities elsewhere. To their faith, to other things. I use the example of a marathon runner. Most people are more willing to accommodate that kind of discipline than with family. We think about it as a responsibility, and we honor it, and we try to accommodate it. And there'll be some situations where we can't, but there are a lot we can. I'll just say one last thing. I went back, and I remember when President Obama gave his inaugural address, and at one point he called for a new era of responsibility. And I thought to myself then, he had a really good mother. Because as a mother, I spend so much time trying to inculcate responsibility in my kids. When they screw up, I say to them, okay, you screwed up. I understand that. You have to take responsibility for it. You have to own up. I care much less about what you did than that you take responsibility and you accept the consequences and you go forward. So as a mother, that's what I thought. But he was talking about responsibility for our choices, responsibility to, you know, our work, but to our people, to the country. And I think we should think about this in terms of responsibility and in terms of honoring that.
Well, let's open it up to questions from, I think we have like a Phil Donahue situation with the mics. If anybody remembers Phil Donahue in this crowd. So, yeah, if you can just say, well, you don't have to say your name. You can do it pseudo-anonymously. Go ahead.
Hi, no, it's okay. My name is Charlotte Brownlee, and I work in a high school in California. I have a question about the influence of this sort of change in parenting. And we're going to hear from the Tiger Mom tomorrow and a lot of things about whether our culture of parenting and perhaps the spoiling of our children is causing maybe a pull on the part of mothers to feel like they have to do more in the realm of parenting. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
We talked about that at breakfast.
We did. We did.
Go ahead.
So I think this is really interesting, and I've had a number of people ask me about it. I hadn't thought of it because I've never felt any pressure to kind of be a perfect mom. I'm doing the best I can, and you know, I think I'm providing a good role model, and my husband and I are providing a good living. So I've never experienced that pressure that, you know, other moms are doing all this perfect stuff, and that it pulls, if that is a big part of it, we need to take that on also. I mean, I do think that I'm raising 2 boys. I'm raising them we're raising them, but from my dimension, they're seeing a strong, powerful woman who's committed to her work as well as to her family, and I think that's really important. So that's the way I don't feel guilty at all that I don't give them all the things that other mothers do, and we joke about that, you know, in the family, and obviously my husband has a full-time career, and so the same thing, you know. So I think that's something we need to engage. It's not something, frankly, that I had experienced or thought of until people connected these two.
I can see what you're saying, because I think overparenting exacerbates the guilt you feel if you're a working mother, and but I think overparenting is gross, and it's something I've been kind of aware of and mindful of for a while when it first sort of started being discussed, completely living vicariously through your kids and never allowing them to deal with disappointment or setbacks. I think that's really not serving our children well. But I can see how, you know, the mother who quit her job as an associate at a big, you know, fancy law firm in New York, who's now running the PTA like she's running a corporate board, you know, I mean, it does make you feel like less of a mother when you witness that. So I do think it is having an influence on people's comfort level when it comes to being professional. Hello, Jane.
There's a man over there.
Oh, there's a man. Oh, good, a man.
Good.
We'll get to the men in a second. But by the way, can I just say Jane Harmon is a great grandmother.
Can you
and
believe
she
it?
looks
Step. Great
friggin'
grandmother.
amazing. Just
But
don't
a real
forget,
grandmother. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both for being such amazing role models to so many women. I am, as you just heard, but I am the mother of 4 very well-educated kids, 2 women and 2 men. And my older daughter, who is a lawyer, left the career in the high-powered law firm to take a less demanding career. She doesn't overparent, I want to observe, but she didn't think that there were choices, and I didn't think over a long career that there were the kind of choices that Anne-Marie so brilliantly sets out in her article. Here's my question, and it has to do with some of the comments you're getting and some of the comments around you that you're not getting. Do some women feel threatened by other women's success? Either those who've made it or those who've what we could call opted out. And, you know, what do we say to those women? How do we kind of coax them into understanding that a more successful sisterhood is in every woman's interest?
I think there's...
I was just gonna, are you suggesting like women are undermining women and that's why they're leaving the workplace, or?
No, I'm saying that goes on around this whole subject. Either those who've opted out or those who have made it by killing themselves and never taking a minute off.
Oh, so there's a lot of resentment from all, yeah.
Other women who might
Like the mommy wars type thing.
Another thing I'd like to abandon.
Yeah.
I would like to abolish the term mommy wars and mommy track. It's so patronizing.
Sorry.
Yeah. No,
I didn't mean it that way.
no, but you're right. That is how we talk about it. Well, you know, I've gotten some really, really negative commentary from a number of places. One is, interestingly, and I sort of expected it, from feminists of the generation ahead of me. 2 of the nastiest articles have been written by women who are professors and do have flexible time and are having it all exactly as I predict that they can because they're professors. You know, I think there are these issues among women who are working from home or not working for a while, and women who are. I think in part one of the things I've seen is that so many of the women who have decided to take a pause are made to feel bad by the surrounding culture. I mean, as I said, I just couldn't believe it when I got back to Princeton and I would say, I'm doing this, and I got these negative messages. I was like, who are you kidding? You know, I'm totally committed to my career, but I'm choosing my kids. And when people feel bad, they lash out. That said, Andy and I both would say we never would have made it through elementary school without this one wonderful woman who had a Harvard business degree. She was taking time out. She's working again now. We were loser parents. I mean, come on. We could not remember exactly when you had to hand this thing in. We're both working full time, and we were doing the best we could. She was just a godsend. She would call us and say, I'm sure you noticed that you're supposed to bring in a dish tomorrow. I just wanted to remind you, just in case. And she would so often kind of know that we were stretched and that she could help, and she did. And that's the kind of thing often I've also seen where women really do support each other in ways that say, hey, we're proud of what you're doing, we're making different choices, but we really can help you. And so I've seen examples of both, and I certainly think we can go more in that direction.
My name is Malik. I'm from the Sultanate of Oman in Arabia. And I think, ladies, you rock, as the Arabs would say. Thank you. I have maybe not a question, but an observation and something that I've lived with in our lives. We have a very forward-thinking leader, the Sultan, and he's really very much pro-women, and this is an example in the Arab world by itself, and we're proud to have him as a leader. My aunt is, she was with my uncle. He was the ambassador at the UN in New York, and she's a career woman, but she followed her husband, and for 10 years was there creating these name tags for the dinners, and she looked after the guests. And His Majesty then gave her a chance to be the ambassador to Oman, to Washington. She's in Washington, D.C., Hunayn al-Mugheri. And the husband today, my uncle, is supporting her in D.C. So if this can be done in the Arab world...
Love it.
If this can be done in the Arab world, I think, I'm surprised it's being discussed in America, where everything is so kind of, equal. But I think it's an example to the ladies and men in my country to follow. They are role models in our country. And I think this is where we need to go. And I think it's a great opportunity to open the discussions here and to give both men and women an opportunity to work as well. Thank you.
You can pick anyone, whatever.
Hi, I'm Pam Sellers from CNN. And Anne-Marie, congratulations. You and I spoke about this a long time ago, and we talked about it's really not about why can't women have it all. It's can we really have it all? We really can't have it all at the same time, is really what you and I have discussed. My question for you is, and I'm thrilled that Andy is here, this alpha notion, whether we like it or not, somebody's
I didn't hear
the alpha. Somebody has to be the alpha when you're in a partnership. And I would love your advice. Is that the way that it has to be? Does someone have to be the person who's on the track while the other person steps back? Or, do you, how, help, how?
Andy's not chopped liver, by the way.
You want to stand up for a second? Nobody who knows my husband would not call him an alpha male, believe me. He is a full-time tenured professor at Harvard and then at Princeton. He writes music reviews. In addition to being a political scientist, he's an accomplished photographer and a fabulous cook. Right? I don't think that is the way we should talk about it. And I really don't like alpha and beta. But this is not, what I think is true is that in two career couples where both members of the couple have, have really important career aspirations, there has to be give. Both are going to have to make compromises. We were fortunate, we're both academics. I knew that this was hugely important. I just didn't know how important until I went to Washington and discovered it otherwise. Andy has been able to spend more time. He has certainly done fewer things that he could have otherwise done on the career track because he's doing that. But then again, I came back from Washington and I'm making different choices. So I see this much more as, two people who want similar things for their family and to have the tremendous satisfaction of a profession that you love and you're committed to. you're just going to have to make some compromises. And if there's still many more women making those compromises than men, I'd like to see many more men feeling enabled and empowered to make those compromises. But where it's going to be the women, then I want women to be able to come back on and still compete, even if it's a little later in their careers than they would have otherwise done.
There's a bunch down here. I'm this, you. I don't know what to. I think so.
Is it on?
There
Yes.
it is.
First of all, again, thank you for speaking up. Everyone's thinking the things that you're saying. Social movements are sort of pendular. They go to extremes. I graduated college the same year you did, and the idea of getting married and staying home with children was devalued. And worked hard and made the sacrifices, and now I see the next generation sort of stopping out, not opting out. To me, we need to change the language completely. It's not the mommy track, it's not the financial bottom line, it's not the domestic bottom line, it's work-life balance, and it's happiness.
Yes.
And it applies equally to mothers and fathers, males and females, and we really have to get rid of the constructs that say, you know, this is the traditional male role and we're not letting it shift in any way, and here's the traditional female role, that also won't shift. So I'm hoping the pendulum swings somewhere in the middle and allows for both fathers and mothers to balance work and family time. And we need to change our vocabulary completely.
But also attitudes, because men who stay at home with kids are still, I mean, talk about being devalued. Yeah. They're really, I mean, they're considered sort of, I mean, ridiculed. And so I think, how do you change those? They're so entrenched in the hunter-gatherer stuff and blah, blah, blah. I mean, how do you change that?
Well, Susan, I think you're exactly right. We start by changing the frame. Right? Any social change, you change the frame, you change the way you think about it, and you change the vocabulary. As I said, so much of this, there's a vocabulary of failure. I read these articles about how I dropped out, and I think, well, in the first place, that would be news to my family. But second, dropped out?
You're such a slacker.
I know, I don't do anything. But I mean, dropped out, we use dropout for people who don't finish school, who don't have, you know, careers at all. So you change the vocabulary to begin with, and you start thinking about, that's why I keep talking about responsibility and values. You know, though there are ways to talk about this and think about this. That's not enough. You still then got to go make the actual change. But absolutely, you start by saying this. Everything is slanted toward the idea that, you know, take one example. Why don't we talk about working fathers? Why do we just talk about working mothers? That assumes mothers are in the home, and if they're not, then they're working, then we call them working mothers. But there are lots of men who work, and some number of them are fathers, and they are working fathers, which means they have responsibilities to their kids and to their work in ways that people who are not working fathers are different, or working sons and working daughters, because again, this is about our parents and our spouses as much as our kids.
Wouldn't it be great to have a male journalist be asked what I've been asked 20 million times? How do you juggle it all?
Yeah, right.
I mean, men are never asked that question.
Exactly, because it's an assumption about primary responsibilities that has to change.
Can you yell? I think the mic is somewhere. Here. Oh, we have a man. Hold on. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's a woman. I can't see you. Sorry. Go ahead.
I know. That's why I'm standing up. Hi, I'm Nancy Zerkin, and I was one of the pioneers in the 70s. And we all struggled. And your book, or your article, really gave voice and analysis to what we've all done over these past 40 years. But the conversation now, as it was then, is very elitist. And that's something that bothered me then. It still bothers me, because yes, we can have policies in our workplace In my organization, we have 45 in staff, and it's a very friendly workplace. But the fact is, most women work because they have to. This is a very elitist group. We are all well-educated, had great choices, and could do anything we wanted within these choices and our family. And so it's time for us, in our rhetoric, in our writing, in the policies in the workplace, for every one of us to be helpful. I was helpful in passing FMLA, and that's been a very important law. But there are
Family
other
and Medical Leave
policies
Act.
that are important. Thank you, and thank you for being here.
I just say I agree. But I think both conversations have to happen at once. But absolutely.
Paula Broadwell. I'm a military officer turned academic, and I want to thank you for being role models, and Jane for being a role model, and so many other women in this room for being trailblazers, you included. I'd like your reflections on women's opportunities in the military. When I was born in the early 70s, women were 2% of the Army. Now we're 15% and 15% across the board, as low as 6% in the Marines. But with the discussion about opening up more combat arms positions to women, there was kind of similar debate in response to your article amongst Rangers and infantry, thinking, we don't want to change the standard, it's going to change the culture. I'm for one standard. We're not going to change the culture. We've come a long way, baby, in the military so far. But if there's resistance within the institution, and I don't think you see that in so many institutions, but definitely within the military, there's still a bit of an old boys school. I'm happy to be part of it, but would like your thoughts on how we can continue to fight and get to the top in the military.
So I'm glad you asked that. I actually have heard from a couple of military men in the last week, and I've immediately said, boy, I want to enlist you in whatever we do going forward, because your voices are very, very important. And I've mentored a lot of young women who've been in the military, and there I think there may be different ways we need to frame it in the military in terms of being able both to obviously meet one standard. I don't think anybody here thinks there should be, two standards, but what I'm hearing is, again, in terms of the tremendous stress on the force, in terms of being able to allow women to advance, but also, and here again, men to advance who have strong working wives. I shouldn't say strong. Stay-at-home mothers are as strong as anybody I know. But have very committed career wives. What I'm hearing is that there are men dropping out of the military because they can't actually make that work. And that's the way I would probably frame it in terms of wanting to have the best military we can. We want to both be able to have women, and we want to make sure we've got men who have the leadership caliber we want in the military. Many of them are going to be married to wives who are also have full-time careers, and we've got to allow some accommodation. But I would welcome the conversation in every profession about what are the specific issues, how do you frame them, and what kinds of choices you can make. And you're going to be part of that conversation. General Odierno, General Petraeus is a close friend and colleague, and I'll make sure, a former General Petraeus.
I think we have time for maybe a couple more. Go ahead. Hi.
My name is Mark Hannes, and I really liked your article. One of the main takeaways I took from it, you said, is that until we have more women in positions of power, we're not going to see the change. And when you talk about foreign policy, I guess I was a little confused about how much weight you gave to correlation or causation, because when I look at foreign policy, the last 4 secretaries of state, 3 of them were women. There were other women and senior leaders of you, Susan Rice, Samantha Power. And I'm wondering, is this more of a generational issue, or is it a gender issue? And how do you, because when we've had women in foreign policy in these key leadership positions, how come we haven't seen this change that we need to see, if that's one of your main conclusions?
Great. Thank you for the question. So first place, there's a change that I think can happen starting now through all of us, and what we can ask for and what we can shape and what every employer and manager can start doing, and that doesn't need to wait on anything except our own will. Then there is a broader change, and this goes to the point in terms of conditions for working women across the country in terms of daycare and social policy. And frankly, as somebody pointed out, going back to the policies we had in World War II, when only women were in the workplace, or not only, but a large number. And that is where I think we need more women at the top. So, but then to go to your question, I don't think that just having a woman president is going to make things magically perfect for women across the board, and I don't think that women automatically lead differently than men. In fact, there's a lot of work on that. Some do, some don't. I do think women have a different set of perspectives. That's why we value diversity, period, is the people who have different life experiences bring different things to discussions, have different ideas, different takes, and it's very valuable. I would say our foreign policy is changing pretty substantially, and actually having had Madeleine Albright, Condi Rice, and Hillary Clinton in those positions, what you have seen is a steadily growing emphasis on development. Condi Rice helped double the foreign assistance the US gave. Madeleine Albright did a lot, but she did it very quietly because she was the first woman and she really had to look tough, and she is tough. Hillary Clinton, nobody doubts how tough she is. And so she's been able to say, you know, I want development to be an equal pillar with diplomacy in our foreign policy. She's looking at the lives of people around the world, their lived experience in terms of work and health and women's empowerment. She's seeing how many of the foreign policy problems we face are rooted, whether it's terrorism or health pandemics or resource scarcity, rooted in bottom-up policies. And so what you are seeing, although nobody says it's a woman's issue, is women who have broader perspectives.
So a holistic approach.
Exactly.
Do you think Hillary's going to run for president, by the way? What do you think?
I have no idea. I'd love her to, but I have no idea.
Anyway, well, I think you guys have other panels to get to. Anne Marie Slaughter, thank you so much.
Thank you all.